Hello, Jeremy, Carolyn. Thank you for coming and share with us your experience and helping the parents to understand their children, their loved one, about making cultural developments. So I'd like to start with Jeremy. Uh, Tell us your story, growing up in a Chinese family and then become a young adult in this American society. Tell us about your experience in terms of this cultural developments.
Yeah. Okay. So both of my parents are from Taiwan. They came over to study at the University of Houston for college, and just that's where they met. So I have two sisters, one older, one younger. So there's a lot of, uh, as far as cultural is concerned, very much like a lot of other families. When we were growing up, the only language that we spoke was Chinese, and so being in a old only being able to only speak Chinese is a lot of that cultural understanding and um, discovering what it means to be a Chinese person growing up in America. Just especially just understanding a lot of the fact that we only ate um, like we only had McDonald's once every few months or so because it was a privilege, or we would eat pizza, or but for 99% of the time we would eat Chinese food. And so just growing up and understanding what that uh, I didn't know that there was anything else. I didn't know that there were all these different types of places that you could eat, or different. We would mainly go to Asian. We go to Chinatown and shop at those grocery stores. I didn't know that there were other grocery stores that you could go shop at, and so just growing up, it was very heavily influenced by the Chinese culture. As I started growing up and started going to school, um, started to speak English and learn English, and then almost by the time we hit elementary school, we were mainly speaking English, just like a lot of our kids now, especially just understanding that our kids are, especially in our children's ministry, those who grew up speaking Chinese, by the time they start going to school, English becomes the language that they respond in. And so I think for me, it was very uh, it was very hard in trying to figure out which culture that I really belong to, because the Chinese culture, by the time we hit elementary school, the Chinese culture, that's still there, but it became almost exclusively about academics, about how many hours I've been practicing for violin, how many extracurriculars, what kind of grades am I getting in school, what are we doing, as far as like how many hours am I studying, all of these sorts of things. But the American culture is all about sports, about doing attending all of these clubs, attending school dances, attending all of these school events. And so it was really hard to kind of understand which one I belong to. And growing up in middle school and high school, I attended Dulles Middle School and Dulles High School. There's a lot of different cultures or different people, different ethnic groups that are there. And so just quickly realized I did have a lot of Asian friends, um, but we weren't the ones who were like really Chinese people. So there's a group of students, international students, also at Dulles, who were more so within the Chinese culture. But then when we would look at our friends and our Caucasian friends or African American friends, we weren't part of that group either. We didn't belong to that one. We also didn't belong to the Chinese culture. And so trying to figure out what that looked like for us was really, really hard. Um, After graduating from high school and moving on into college, I mean, for me personally, I ended up going a lot more into the Asian American crowd. There's a lot of Asian Americans. I studied at UT Austin. So there's a lot of Asian Americans there. And so overnight, instantly, it became all of my friends they looked all like me. I had friends from Plano, I had friends from Austin, I had friends from all over the world, but they all looked like me, and we all grew up kind of in this same situation. And so in college, this is really where we started to discover that the Asian American culture is not going to be 100% like the Chinese culture, and it's not going to be like the American culture. We discovered that there are things about us that we take from both sides. Learning the language, taking a few things here and there from the Chinese side, and then taking a few things from the American side, and really blending those things together. And so when that discovery happened, that's really where started to become a little bit more confident in who I was, trying to understand who I have become. And that's also very deeply rooted in understanding who Jesus is as well. And because there's along all of this that we're talking about, my parents were very faithful in attending church and making sure that we were at FBCC and that we were still learning about who God was. And so the discovery of all of these things, and just kind of like, it's a whirlwind growing up and trying to understand and trying to figure things out and trying to, just trying to learn about who I am and who I want to be within all of these almost conflicting messages that we get growing up here in America, and also the messages of what the Chinese culture expects. It becomes a very, very difficult time, especially in teenage years. And so I think that, just being able to share this part of the story, this is why we're talking about this subject today, because it is very difficult, and it's really hard for young people to even navigate in today's world.
So that is wonderful. You mentioned about this abandonment issue. So when you grow up and from a Chinese culture into American culture and develop Asian American culture, and then in the process, talk to us about this abandonment issue. You feel?
Yeah, I think that it's very, and I can use language as probably the best indicator. So for instance, 从小用中文讲，so every day， 从我每天下学时候，我会每天去我外婆家去，然后我外婆外公每天跟我们用国语讲，所以我可以用国语，然后回答，然后可以跟他们一起讲。可是如果你要我跟你们这样讲一个比较难的，like even right now, I have a hard time saying, like, let's say we want to talk about something deeper or something that's more personal. I have to use English. So when we start to transition from, kids speaking completely in Chinese to kids speaking completely in English. So one of the things that I've noticed is parents, when your kids stop speaking Chinese to you, and I had a conversation with one of our family members. They are first generation, immigrated from Taiwan, moved here. Their kids from 0 to about 5 or 6 only spoke Chinese to them. At the age of 6, when they started attending, kindergarten, the only way that they respond is in English. And so I can use that as a kind of an indicator. So for Chinese speaking parents, it's all of a sudden, oh no, they're abandoning the Chinese culture, they're abandoning the Chinese heritage. All they want to eat is McDonald's and fast food and hamburgers and pasta. They don't want to eat, dim sum, or they don't want to eat, fried rice anymore. And then so parents start to feel this disconnect as their kids begin to, for the first thing to go is going to be that language, the ability. And so it's scary, because all of a sudden you recognize that, one, as an adult, I cannot communicate as well as I would like to my child, and my child is communicating in a way that I cannot really be able to make that connection and make that bridge. And especially this is even more significant when they hit their teenage years, because the expectation, their understanding of what the Chinese culture expects as a teenager is the Chinese culture only wants academic success or monetary success. Like, are you a doctor? Are you an engineer? Are you an accountant? Like those things. And as they're trying to figure out, the Chinese culture, the American culture, the Christian culture, all of these things blended into one person. And along with all of that, just realizing I can't communicate with my parents, or my parents cannot communicate with me. They don't understand me. They don't understand what I'm going through. They don't understand. So the teenagers, on one hand, the parents feel abandoned. On the other hand, the teenagers also feel abandoned, because there's just this huge gap that happens, because of just very early on the inability to communicate well with each other.
Wow, thank you. Carolyn, you tell us about your story, and then you also experienced this abandonment issue when your parents came from overseas, and then you were born and raised here. So you have a little different experience, but you also experienced very similar cultural gap, language gap. Share with us also.
Thanks. First, I was in San Francisco, and we were in the very heart of the community outside of Chinatown that was all Asian. So my whole class was almost all Asian in elementary school. Then when we moved to LA, my father died when I was very young. So then we moved to LA, and we also lived in the most Asian area. And growing up, I was not in the minority, even though we were the model minority. I was not the minority in my classes. We were all Asian, but a lot of us were I grew up with Japanese Americans, and so they were maybe fourth generation, fifth generation. And so for that reason, I felt very much like I was very Chinese. My mom only spoke Chinese, and it was really hard for her to speak English. So for that reason, I was very embarrassed growing up, because I felt like I was not very American like my friends. And when my mom would talk, and when we would get together with my friends, I felt embarrassed because her English wasn't very good. She did not have a very high education growing up. And so she had to learn English by herself. And but at the time I was young, and I didn't know, not to be embarrassed. And so she wasn't able to get involved with things with me at school, and there was a big disconnect. But I loved her very much. I knew she loved me, but I was just always embarrassed about my background. So that might be very different for kids nowadays. Being very proud of being Chinese, I hope, but I think it's a struggle that we all go through when we're growing up. We want to fit in. We want so much to be accepted by our community. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that was just the hardest part about growing up.
Okay, so how do you deal with this sense of abandonment? Your parents kind of not there when you go through stages like this?
What was very interesting was because my father passed away when I was young, so I know my story is different, that we had an extremely close relationship. We talked about everything. She shared with me her deepest fears, her hurts when she was lonely and depressed. She would tell me everything. She would tell me about her friendships, her struggles with her friends even, her loneliness after my dad passed away, her struggle with finances, making business decisions. She told me everything. And so for that reason, I told her everything. I told her about when I wanted to date a Hispanic boy. I told her about I asked her about, what if I married an African American boy? Would you be upset with me? So I told her all of my struggles, and her answer was not always Chinese answer. Because she came from a Christian family, she answered me and she told me, yeah, I know that the Christian answer is I shouldn't care. I should only care about what is godly, that the boy would love Jesus first. That is, I know, number one. But I tell you, honestly, I struggle with being prejudiced. She would tell me, I will have a hard time, but I will try to love him. But she was always honest with me. And I feel like for that reason, I was able to share with her all of my frustrations of being like left out, feeling like I didn't fit in. And so that she understood, and she cried with me, and she sympathized with me. And she was just always proud of me, whatever I was able to do. I was not good at math or science, and I almost failed my chemistry class, but she always stood by me and just said, you're trying your best, just do your best, and serve the Lord with all your heart. And that made it so that we were able to stay together, very close through all our years together.
Well, thank you for sharing. Now let's talk about both of you have been working with teenagers for a very long time, and then your personal experience. Tells us about stages that you see in terms of cultural developments for the second generation. Jeremy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Depending on how early the parents have immigrated to the United States, will depend on kind of the scale of which their children start off on. So if you immigrated when you were a lot younger and have been in the United States longer, there's a little bit more, you kind of start further along this scale. So let's just assume that you just came as an adult, your children are either born here immediately or born in China, and then they came over. And so very early on, the first stage is always going to be the parents' culture. And so whatever that is, whatever's most dominant in the parents' culture. So if that's Chinese, if that's from Hong Kong, if that's from Taiwan, that's going to be the most dominant culture, because that's going to be integrated in everything, even in the way that kids are born, right? There's even in the Chinese culture, there's, the mom is supposed to stay in the house or in a secluded area for 1 month. They're supposed to eat special food. They're supposed to have certain, they're supposed to do certain things, we all know what we're talking about. But so that is very deeply, deeply ingrained. And then the second stage of this is when your kids start attending some kind of or some kind of educational system. So it's either preschool or online, like a lot of online materials. They start interacting with this different aspect or different people, of seeing, that if you take them to daycare, you kind of start seeing, because then a lot of daycare workers are not going to be, unless you go to a specifically Chinese daycare, you're going to get a lot of African Americans, you're going to get Caucasians, you're going to get Hispanic, you're going to get a lot of different cultures, and then they're going to start developing or start understanding or seeing different things. And as a parent, you're going to have to make that adjustment too, because the standards for a preschool or a daycare, they're going to require you to meet certain standards. The biggest shift is when they start attending classes, when you start sending them to school in kindergarten through elementary school. That's going to be one of the first big shift, because that's when they stop speaking to you in Chinese at home. They're going to respond to you in English. They're going to only talk to you in English, and then they're going to want you to respond in English as well. And then I would say the next major shift is going to be from middle school all the way to high school. because they are trying during this time, from a developmental stage, and I know that you guys are talking about that in a different segment, but developmentally, they are trying to discover identity. When you're trying to discover identity, you're going to factor in all of these different things: culture, Chinese culture, American culture, Christian culture, and then you're going to trying to squeeze them into one person. So the biggest struggle is going to be in these teenage years because they don't know who they are. They don't know who they are because they're not Chinese kids. Okay, they're not Chinese kids and they're not American kids. So if you're not Chinese and you're not American and you live in America, what are you? And so that's the question. That's really the question that we really need to help our children understand. They don't belong to the Chinese culture. When I go back to Taiwan and I walk around, I look like a Taiwanese person, but I also don't look like a Taiwanese person. People can very clearly tell as I'm walking, in the MRT. They're like, they can tell you're not from here. You're not from here. Just by the way I dress, by the way that my backpack looks different. Just things that how I am. They can tell. But when I'm walking around here in the United States, they can also tell. I've been asked the question, where are you from? And I say, I'm from Houston. I don't know what you're talking about. Like I was born here. And so if you're not from the culture, the country, or in the culture that your parents are from, and you're not from the country and the culture that you live in, what are you? And so that is really the difficult part that we're talking about here. And then so somewhere in between, especially for parents, we don't know how to handle this. So, I think my parents didn't know how to handle it either. I mean, I think they tried their best in trying to talk us through, making sure that they pushed the things that they thought were important, attending church, making sure that we stuck with all of our extracurriculars as far as like, our musical instruments, and like one of my sisters is an artist, so drawing and things like that. And then also academics, trying to make sure that we keep all of those things together. It's still really hard because what is the culture that we can really, as Asian Americans, what is the one that we can claim as our own? And I think that's really, really hard. And I think that the Asian American culture now is a lot more available, just through the internet and through just seeing that, it's not just a few people around where I grew up, but there's a whole slew of us, because of the ability to immigrate from China to America, that there's all of these people who are growing up in this Asian American culture that is different, that is not Chinese culture and it's not American culture.
That's wonderful. What kind of advice you would give to the parents when their kids growing up in here, making cultural transitions? Carolyn, you talk about how close you were with your mom, even though with the cultural differences, but that emotional bonding carry through, and then your mom living out the Christian values, and then helping you to make the transition into a young adult, making decision accordingly. So what kind of advice you would give to the parents when their students, when our student going through teenager time, making the cultural adjustment? Carolyn?
I think it's a time where their eyes are open and they will be able to see whether or not you're being authentic. If you are really, and I'm going to be talking to the middle schoolers about this, are you being hypocritical? Are you just being a Christian and acting like a Christian, but you're not really? So in this way, I'll just share with you, for my mom, she didn't make me do Bible study with her. She didn't make me sit down for prayer meetings with her. But there were times where she really had a deep thing on her heart, and she would just grab me and say, I need to pray. Pray with me. I need to pray with you. And it wasn't about me being bad, like as punishment or something, or a disciple lesson. It was just, she had something on her heart. And then she just would grab me and say, I need to pray. Can you pray with me? And that was just a very authentic time for me. Not that Bible studies are bad. If you can, it's just that language separated us. So we couldn't always talk about spiritual things. But she would just come and pray with me, or she would just say, can you read this verse for me? I just want to hear it in English even. And that was her time. So I feel like that really helped me to find out what it really meant to be authentic with me and authentic with her faith. So she never did anything just because she had to do it, or was because it was the right thing to do, or it looked good, or looked like the model minority, which is something that I struggled with. I struggled with trying to look good and do the right thing all the time. And hers just came from a place of truly what she was learning in scripture and what she heard from her pastor. And she would just say, hey, can you do this with me? And it was very meaningful for me.
Okay, being authentic, live out your Christian faith, really make a major impact in helping the children to go through stages of development. That's just wonderful. Jeremy, what kind of advice you give to the parents?
Yeah, I think, for me, language is what will allow us to communicate well. So the first thing I would say is, one is we first need to learn how to listen well. The very first thing is, how do we listen to our children talk about these things? Can we give them an opportunity to share whatever it is that they want to share with us, and not give them a lecture about what they shared? It's really easy for us to take every single opportunity to say, that's not the right way to think. That's not, that's not what the Bible says. And there's not, there's a place for teaching. But what our kids want, what I really wanted as growing up, was for my parents to understand like the struggles that I had, the things that I was going through. And it was hard because every time I would talk to my parents about it, I would get a lecture about, this is the right way to do things. This is how you should be doing it. This is, I would be like, I really struggled in chemistry. And my parents would say, well, it's time to get a tutor. It's time, it's very solutions oriented. We want to fix it. And that's very natural for parents, absolutely. But are those opportunities where we just sit down and we listen to what our kids are going through, and really learn to empathize and say, yeah, that's really, really hard. That's really tough. I'm sorry you have to go through that, but it helps me understand what your situation is. And then having said that, it's how can we communicate well? It will have to be, unfortunately, as much as we would like to have our kids speak Chinese and fluently, it's a struggle. And I'll share this with you. Growing up, like I shared earlier, every day going to Waipo's house, I can speak Chinese. When I went to UT Austin, I specifically went and took Chinese as my language studies. So not only could I, at one point, I could read a Chinese newspaper, but because we live in America, I don't have that. I guess I could access that every day, but I don't. I read English, I speak English, but Chinese is not. So I have to intentionally go out of my way to learn how to speak and communicate in Chinese. And it's really, really hard because I don't get to use it every day. What I do use is English. And I know that this is a lot to ask for parents, but parents, can we be a little bit more diligent in learning the language that our kids speak? These are your kids, and you love them in a way that, even for us as their youth staff, we love your kids too, but the way that you love them is going to be way different. And even though we can communicate well, the goal isn't for us as the youth staff to communicate well with your kids. The goal is for us to equip you, and this is why you're attending this class, how you as a parent can have these spiritual conversations. And I would encourage parents to say this: you don't need to jump leaps and bounds, but what's the next step? If it's to learn English, like what Carolyn was sharing, have your kids read the Bible in English to you. I think that's a really great step. Taking the time and showing your kids that you're making an effort to learn their language and be able to communicate on their level. And I think that is going to be very, very important. And it's hard. Learning a new language is definitely hard. And I really struggle. Even now, I'm trying to still continue to learn how to speak and read Chinese. And I completely get it. It's really, really tough. It's really hard. So I don't, and so if it's any encouragement for parents to make an effort, like after this class, sign up for an English class, or our care center has English was it English as a second language class. Like, there's a lot of resources that we can use, and ultimately the goal is to have a better relationship with our children, and that would be my encouragement for parents.
That's great. Now, my final question is, how would a parent learn the kids' culture, or helping them to go through this cultural adjustment? You mentioned different stages. They end up being Asian American, but really don't belong to any group, kind of in between. So what can we do as parents to help them to make the cultural transitions or development into maturity?
Yeah, I think one of the best ways is to learn as much about your child as possible. Take the time to really understand who they are, and understand that if they're in middle school, especially if they enter into middle school, they're going to kind of early on they kind of still have the certain way of thinking, but the way of thinking quickly changes as they enter especially seventh grade. Sixth grade, there's a huge gap between sixth grade and then seventh grade. And then seventh grade onward, it's this kind of an uncertain journey. It's an uncertain journey and an uncertain discovery. And so for parents, really, one, I would say extend grace to yourself, because each child is different and each child's journey is going to be different. So extend grace to yourself and understanding that, it's not, as a parent, you may want to help them navigate. You may want to do or fix things, but in the long, you may not be able to. And then two, extend grace to your child, because they're going to say certain things that you will not agree with. They're going to think certain things that you will not agree with. And then the hardest thing will be is if they feel as though they can't share any of that with you. So if they feel like, I can't talk to my parents about this, they're going to just yell at me, or they're going to ground me, or they're going to give me a lecture, or they're going to talk to me like, hey, you shouldn't talk about these things. The more we can open those doors of communication and showing them like, hey, because the love that a parent has for a child is unconditional. It's unconditional. So even if they offend you, just showing them that, hey, no matter what, like I may not agree with you, but you can always come to talk to me about it. And the door of communication, that is going to always be open, because remember, during these teenage years, they're going to change their minds. They're going to flip-flop. They're going to go back and forth. They're going to say things just to see if you agree with them or not, or how you will react to those things. And so to just say, and I know that not a lot of parents are able to do this or are comfortable with doing this. And so it takes practice. These things that we're talking about takes practice. It's a skill that we can develop. It's not, oh, you either have it or you don't. It's not like that. But it's something that we can, especially how to communicate well, that's a skill that we can definitely develop.
Thank you. Carolyn, what is your advice helping especially girls to make cultural developments?
I think it's very, very hard in today's culture, as I guess the role of women has changed over the years, even in China as well as in the United States. I struggle too, I struggle too knowing how to talk to teen girls and dealing with all the things that they're exposed to. I will say the biggest struggle I think I see is that our culture is not one of humility. But I think humility is something that we all struggle with. And as a parent, I see so many parents you guys are amazing. You guys are at the top of your class, and you are brilliant and successful in ways that I will never be, and possibly your children will not be as well. And how you handle your success and how you handle it flows down from you to your children. Your pride is well earned, but how you interact with others or how you express your pride can also affect how your children will interact with you and take your advice or not. We are all feeling the sense of empowerment as women, and as young girls, you tell them to be the best. Don't let boys look down on you. You can be the top two, very, very best. And all this is going into your girls and to your boys too, but to the girls especially, this empowerment. So how you interact with your daughters, fathers as well as mothers, can have a big impact on how they view themselves in terms of their pride and their ability to be, to be honest, their ability to submit to the authority of the Lord, as well as to submit to your authority. And it's not about beating them down. That is not humility, beating someone down to obey you, to show them your superior intellect or your, whatever. It is humility. That's one thing that my mom really stressed with me. She had humility because she was poor, grew up poor, and did not have a lot of education. So she always taught me to be humble. As she doesn't know. I don't have all the answers. Let's try to figure it out together. What do you think? Like Jeremy was saying, she listened to what I thought. She considered it. We argued, but we will listen to each other a lot. And I really valued her input and hearing her struggle and her changing her mind and saying, I think you're right. Homeless people, it's not all their fault. You're right. Maybe it's wrong for us to be prejudiced against these people. They had it hard too. And hearing her change her mind and admit that she was wrong, or that she would say sorry, changed so much for me.
Wow, that's a lot of wisdom. Thanks very much for both of you sharing with us. So I hope we have time to some other time, opportunity to speak on some other subject and issue. Thanks so much again. Thank you.